More than Iron Man, it was Tony Stark that fascinated me, right? If you put in this much amount, I will promise you, if we meet Elon Musk the next time, we will invite you as well, so you can come say hi. By Anand, that was the first satellite we built. It was named in memory of one of the interns that had worked with us who wasn't with us anymore.
I think this is unique about BITS Pilani, right? The alumni network is extremely strong, committed and caring.
There has never been a case where I have reached out cold to an alumni of BITS and have not gotten a response or they have not agreed to meet.
Hello, welcome to PTI's show at 4 Parliament Street. This story is about a boy growing up in a Karnataka village who was fascinated by space. He devoured science fiction novels. He was inspired by Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, and was also inspired by Elon Musk. He took his passion and fueled it in college. By the time he graduated from BITS Pilani in mathematics, space was no longer a fantasy for Awais Ahmed. Today, Awais runs one of India's leading space startups and does business with Elon Musk. And guess what? He's only 26. His company Pixxel Space, which is based in Bengaluru, specializes in building satellites to take images of Earth that no ordinary camera can capture. Awais is with us today to talk about his plans for the future and to explain how the images taken by his satellites help farmers, mining companies, oil companies, and many more. Awais, welcome to PTI and thanks for being with us. You're 26 years old, you have launched satellites in space. You were the finalist in the Hyperloop competition. You actually created a pod that could go into vacuum. Where did this fascination with space and technology start from?
Yeah, I think it starts in childhood, obviously. Like most kids, I was fascinated with space, the universe. I remember badgering my dad to get me a telescope to be able to see it, but of course at that stage we couldn't afford it. But thankfully, the village I grew up in was kind of isolated from the rest of the world, so you don't generally get to see what's outside. But I was lucky that my dad was a little bit more particular about my education, not just in the classroom, but specifically outside of it as well.
I'll just interrupt you. You said you grew up in a village?
Yeah, it's called Aldur in Chikmagalur district of Karnataka. It's about 30 to 40 minutes from the town of Chikmagalur. So the village is called Aldur. My father, my grandfather have sort of lived there for a while. So the first memories of space were these very colorful encyclopedias that we might have seen about space. And then getting access to one of those books was like a big deal. And so I used to just ponder over the images of black holes and nebula and stars and all of that. So I think that's where the seed of it essentially began, at least as far as I can remember. But in terms of real actionables, it happened after I ended up joining BITS Pilani. The first time I'd gone out of state and quite intimidating atmosphere because you had the best of the folks from across the country coming into one place. You are in a constant state of an imposter syndrome. So am I doing enough? But there was a team called Team Anand, which was a student satellite team, which was a team that was part of the ISRO student satellite program, done in selective universities where scientists from ISRO would come in and help teach how to design, build satellites. So as soon as I got to learn that there was this team present in BITS, I was like, I want to be a part of it. And you have to go through a testing stage to be a part of the team. They selected about 6 to 8 people from every batch, and then they did it for 4 years, and then the mantle kept passing over. So thankfully became a part of that team, and more than going to classes, I think I spent my time learning and doing that, especially 4th, 5th month of college and from there till the middle of second year or so. And that was a big difference between being fascinated with space as a concept and then figuring out how to actually build things with your own hand that will need to go to space, survive in the harsh confines of vacuum and so on. And that taught a lot. But then beyond that, the more formative experience was the Hyperloop India experience, which was when we saw Elon Musk tweeting about Hyperloop and the traffic in LA. SpaceX decided to create this competition where they said, okay, we will build this 1 mile long vacuum tube at our headquarters in Los Angeles. US teams come from across the world and race here, and we will see who can build it the best. We decided to participate as kind of a joke because we thought we might get a small chance to meet Elon Musk. For most engineers, when he was a little bit more saner, a lot of more inspiration in terms of what he had achieved with Tesla and SpaceX. And we said, okay, we might get a chance to meet him. But we got through the first stage, and then we had to get serious, and then we put a team together and kept on getting through and became one of the 20 finalist teams out of 2,500 global applicants. Now we have to figure out how to actually build this. So we came down to Bangalore, and in a span of about 3 months, with sponsorship and help from other people and all of that, we're able to put it together. And when we took it to the SpaceX headquarters, that was an even more severe case of imposter syndrome, because now you had folks from the likes of MIT and Technical Institute of Munich, much better funded teams, but also much more senior folks. These folks were either masters or PhDs, whereas we were all bachelor students from BITS. But I think that really taught that you don't really need to have an experienced team to do something. If you really have dedicated young folks, you can sort of build something like that and take it, present it to Elon, meet someone like that and the rest of the SpaceX team. But the final, I think, inspiration was just looking at the SpaceX factory. Probably one of the most cutting edge places in the world in terms of the kind of tech being built. You're building engines that is taking one of the world's most powerful rockets to space. And we got to see that firsthand through our own eyes. And that was like kind of a pilgrimage for me, seeing those rocket engines being built. The first rocket booster that had landed back after going to space on Earth, the first case of reusability in a rocket and all of that. That was like the eureka moment. I remember 27th of August in 2017 that I want to devote the rest of my life to space. That seems to be the calling. So yeah.
So Hyperloop, just to explain, Hyperloop is a transportation concept where it's a big vacuum tube through which a pod will travel at 400 kilometers per hour or higher. And you were a finalist, one of the finalists in that, although you could not actually get your pod to travel in that. You moved away from Hyperloop, and then you created this company which launches satellites, and one of the satellites was launched by SpaceX. So Elon Musk, who was an awe-inspiring figure for you, became a colleague. You actually went and negotiated with him.
I think colleague would be a little too far.
Business partner.
He didn't know we were launching a satellite. I think it was a smaller satellite compared to the other bigger satellites. But yes, I think life came full circle from, looking up to someone and then, having a business deal with that company. Obviously, yeah, it was a big leap.
So you are launching something called the Hyperspectral imaging satellites. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so I think coming back from the Hyperloop experience, the idea was, let's see what I can do in space and just dive deep into whatever is happening, from space stations to in-space manufacturing to interstellar spacecraft and so on. And the realization was, okay, there's so much satellite data coming down from space. Let's see if we can use that to analyze whatever is happening across the globe. If we were looking at farms, can we give farmers an advance notice of if there is a pest infestation or a crop disease before symptoms start to show up? Can we look at these greenhouse gas emissions coming in from places they shouldn't be coming in from, and if they're even happening, because most of these gases are invisible? The idea was to use satellite data for all of that. And when we used all of the current available sources of data from satellites in space, we realized, okay, you can see some things. Obviously, you can see buildings, you can see roads, you can identify planes and so on. But what you can't really see are these invisible things that we need to be seeing. If I wanted to see methane leaks from a natural gas pipeline, we couldn't see that from any of the data sources available in space. If I wanted to see an underground oil leak and what is that happening, we couldn't do that. We couldn't see that. If we wanted to identify if a particular mineral is present somewhere, we couldn't identify if that is a mineral versus a normal rock or something. So there was a gap in what we ideally should have been seeing versus what we weren't. And a very crude example is, if I get internal bleeding and I go to a hospital, it won't be a normal camera that will tell the doctor what's happening inside. It'll have to be either an ultrasound scanner or an MRI scanner or something of that sort. So you have to build a physically different way of looking at these things, and that is what led us to what we call hyperspectral imaging. In a very basic sense, human eyes, whenever we see something, we are seeing things in the visible range. We all know that. We have learned VIBGYOR in school. But VIBGYOR is basically in the visible range. And even in visible range, it's a combination of only 3 wavelengths: red, green, and blue. And the VIBGYORs are basically shades of those. So human eyes are only seeing 3 wavelengths. That's what we are able to see. Even normal cameras are RGB cameras, red, green, blue cameras. Existing satellites are a little bit better. They have a couple of infrared bands, so you can see things that are invisible to human eyes, but limited to certain things. Hyperspectral is taking all of this light coming in the visible and infrared range, and it is splitting them into continuous, very minute lines. And so if I, for example, I'm looking at that plant with a normal camera, I can tell that that's a plant, there's leaf there. But if a hyperspectral camera is capturing that, it has broken it into so many different wavelengths that I can now see if there are signs of pest infestation there, or if it's irrigated well enough, and so on. So that's, in basic sense, you're going from 3 wavelengths from human eyes to about 300 wavelengths in hyperspectral. So to build that camera, that's what hyperspectral is, just enabling us to see way beyond human sight.
These satellites are fitted with these special camera, an array of cameras, or is it just one
Each
camera?
satellite is one camera. The detector that you have is splitting them into all of these wavelengths. So you have a different filter and array of wavelengths there, but each satellite is one camera. The plan is to launch a total of 18 satellites. Why 18? Because with 18 we can cover every part of the landmass on a daily basis. Doesn't matter if it's New York or New Delhi or Tokyo or Sydney. Being able to come back and relook at place not only every day, but to be able to do that in almost every place of interest, because things sometimes change in a blink of an eye. So one satellite, one camera, but many satellites.
So once you have this entire constellation of 18 satellites in space, your company will be constantly mining data from the Earth in this wide spectrum of different wavelengths, and that information you will sell to anyone who wants to buy it. That's the business model?
Not anyone, but yeah, companies and organizations that are not on the sanctions list and in friendly countries. But yes, everyone from an agri company to an oil and gas company to government ministries and departments to even an individual sitting at their home wanting to see, hey, I want to take an image of my backyard, should be able to go and do that as long as one can pay for it. So yeah.
That's your ultimate goal.
Yes.
Is there anybody else doing this, or are you like the only one?
So hyperspectral constellation, we are the first ones to do that. So when we launched our first hyperspectral satellite in 2021 and then followed it with 2 more, we became the first in the world to have a hyperspectral constellation. Now there are other companies also trying to do hyperspectral, because obviously if there is a pot of gold, people will go for it. But in terms of the resolution of our data, which is at 5 meters and 300 wavelengths, to the best of my knowledge, at this stage, we're the only ones having built that and launching again 6 more satellites before the end of this year. There are about not more than 4 or 5 serious companies, especially in the North American continent, that are trying to do this. But when we did, we were kind of breaking the ice with hyperspectral. But there were other companies doing satellite imaging of other sorts. We just came in with hyperspectral that unlocks other things.
Are these all indigenously made in India, or you're heavily dependent upon imports from abroad?
So the integration of it is finally done at our facility in Bangalore. The design of all of the satellite is done indigenously. However, not all components are available in the country. For example, if we want to get really highly efficient solar cells for solar panels, these are not the solar cells we use on ground. They have to be much more pure and much more efficient in space. They are only built by about 4 companies, all of which are either in US or in Europe. So we have to procure those from there. So I would say roughly 45 to 50% of the cost is spent in India. The rest of it is split across about 26 to 30 countries. So it's a very global supply chain. But all of it comes together to our facility. So the final integration, knowing how it all works together as a system, is in Bangalore, as well as the initial design as well.
So keeping in mind your accomplishments at a very young age, so where do you draw your inspiration from? And also, who are your ideals in the space sector, both as a scientist and as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I think a combination of different factors from childhood. Reading science fiction helped. Hitchhiker's Guide is a classic.
Asimov,
the Foundation series. Andy Weir, he's more recent, but especially The Martian and Artemis, before he came up with Project Hail Mary. So I would say science fiction is on one side. The other one is, I would say, Tony Stark, in terms of the level of tech advantage and everything else. Iron Man. But more than Iron Man, it was Tony Stark that fascinated me, right? In terms of, if you take away the suit, so many other things, especially in the comics. But if I were to look at space specifically and who would be inspirations, Carl Sagan would probably be out there in terms of how space needs to be and how it can inspire all of us on Earth. And probably also, Kardashev, who came up with the Kardashev civilization scale and all of that. But I would say probably Carl Sagan would be up there.
So how did the investors receive your idea? Was raising funds difficult?
Different stages it has been different, but at every stage it has basically, I think, difficult. But it's fine, it's a challenge, and now we kind of know how it is different for space than it is for AI or for SaaS, right?
did they refuse to take you seriously because you were so young?
Yes. especially at the first stage when we were raising pre-seed, we were still in college. And when we went and talked to investors, we could get into any meeting room we wanted because space is fascinating, and so they wanted to at least be curious and delve deeper into what we were trying to do. But for most of them at that stage, it felt like, oh yeah, this might be just one more college project and passionate project, and will they be able to raise future funds? One very specific feedback we got through somewhere else was this fund that kept on asking us for more and more information for a duration of 6 months. Later, never had the intention of investing because they thought we would never be able to raise any more funds or build something later. And there were many like that. Some people took us more seriously, but they were not willing to take the risk of not only investing money in hardware, but hardware that would need to be in space. But the first initial money came from most of them were alumni from BITS Pilani. They looked at it kind of like philanthropy, I would say. They were like, okay, we will put in maybe $50,000 to $100,000, and if it works, it works. Otherwise, it isn't really making a dent in.
And they were all expatriates.
Most of them were, I would say, 90% of the money that came in were NRIs who had made it in Silicon Valley. I'd made a very brief trip there to meet all of these folks. They were very gracious to take a cold email and meet, and then they were like, okay, we will. After just a couple of conversations, one in person and one after a phone call, they were like, if this works, it's good for BITS, it's good for India. So here, I'm happy to sort of put in a little bit, and we were able to put together a roster of 8 or 10 angel investors. And on the basis of that, we were able to get one small micro VC fund, and then the Techstars accelerator in the US decided to also invest in us at that point in time. So all of that enabled us to raise a decent pre-seed to get started. The seed round turned out, we were almost about to close a $3 million seed round, but then it was in March 2020, and we all know what happened in March 2020. Everything stopped, and the term sheet was pulled because everyone got spooked. And then we restarted the process in April of 2020. So April to July or August was probably the most stressful months because we were running out of money, and we had supposed to have had money, but now we didn't. But thankfully, that 3 ended up becoming 5, ended up becoming 7.3 because people started to the fear of missing out at that point. So 5 became 7.3, and we were able to get through and survive. I would say that was probably the only time where Pixxel was at the risk of not surviving, but especially given COVID, no one knew what would happen. Why would they even invest in a hardware company when you couldn't go to the office and work? But then it became, I would say, relatively easier, but still much tougher. We even joke today internally, let's become an AI company, raise $1 billion, then turn back into a space company, so we have the money to do it.
So how much you have been able to raise, and how much you plan to raise more because to reach this 18 target?
So we've raised a total of $70 million US. The first round was, as I mentioned, 7.3 plus the pre-seed was about 700K, so that ended becoming a seed round of 8 million. The Series A was 27 million, and then the Series B that we raised was 36. That adds up to, I think, 71. That fully funds us for all the satellites we want to launch today. The 6 satellites, the 6 Fireflies we are talking about launching later this year, the Honeybees that we want to launch next year, and all of the infrastructure is paid for and everything else. So right now we are just heads down building the satellites. The idea is to make sure that the revenues we generate from these 6 satellites will sustain us in the years to come, and the investment will be for accelerating and not surviving, which is a little different in space, obviously. So yeah, I think that's what we've been able to do.
So I think this is unique about BITS Pilani, right? The alumni network is extremely strong, committed, and caring.
It is, absolutely. I think that the 2 things, if I were to say, that came out of BITS was one, the peer network at BITS, the students and people from across the country who beyond academics were doing crazy things at those ages that pushed you to do better. And the even more important one was the alumni network. People who have achieved pretty good things in life and made it in life are always open to give it forward. There has never been a case where I have reached out cold to an alumni of BITS and have not gotten a response, or they have not agreed to meet. So we say, your BITS, this batch, they'll be like, come on over, let's talk at least. So yeah.
So no regrets not joining chemical engineering in IIT.
Yeah, it was a choice between the not preferred branches at IITs, if I were to say that, versus going to BITS, and I think BITS turned out well, even though it was in the middle of a desert with barely anything there, worth it.
And you did MS in mathematics, yeah?
Correct. So the idea was to do mathematics with some engineering degree, but I dropped the engineering degree to finish in 4 years because Pixxel was taking off. But yeah, finished with masters in mathematics.
So, Awais, tell us, how did you zero in on SpaceX for your first launch? I believe that's Shakuntala. Why Shakuntala, the name? And you also, I mean, the satellite also completed its life and also was brought back to Earth. Tell us about it.
Sure. So I think with regards to the SpaceX launch, we are always on the lookout for launch opportunities that work for our timeline and work for our cost. In fact, if you go all the way back to 2019, the first launch we booked was with Soyuz in Russia, way before Russia-Ukraine happened. This was, I think, 3 years before that. And when Russia was still interfacing with the rest of the world, because we had called up ISRO and said, hey, we would like to launch a satellite with you. And they were quite honest that, look, we would like to help you, but there is no process for an Indian company to launch with ISRO. If you were a foreign company, it would be a different matter, right? Which was surprising. But then the conversation with Soyuz was, you give us money, we give you launch. And very straightforward. They didn't care if you were students, nothing else. If you have the money, you pay us, we will sign a contract with you to launch it. And then in 2020, when the finance minister announced that space would be opened up to the private sector, that's when I got a call from the Department of Space that now that it has changed, we would like you to launch from ISRO, and we're like more than happy to do that. Always was the intention. And so we moved it to ISRO actually for our first launch. We were supposed to launch in February of 2021, but we were not able to make it because one of our vendors didn't really provide what was to be provided, so we had to redo it for the next few months. And then the launch of it was supposed to happen in October 2021, but since ISRO was waiting for the primary satellite, it ended up being November 2022. So the first satellite we built, the first launch we booked was with ISRO, but ended up going the last because of multiple delays. And as a backup, that in case this demo satellite, the first one we're building, doesn't work, or if the rocket blows up, because that's a non-zero probability in space, we said we will book it in another rocket. We will book another similar demo satellite, Shakuntala, to do that. So Anand was named in memory of one of the interns that had worked with us who wasn't with us anymore. So that's why Anand, that was the first satellite we built. Shakuntala was a little bit of a more funnier story because we were trying to raise investment. And one of the angel investors, I said, okay, let's close this. We've been talking for a couple of months if you want to put in money or not. So went to their place. We had a conversation, and in return for investment then and there, if you put in this much amount, I will promise you two things. If we meet Elon Musk the next time, we will invite you as well, so you can come say hi. And the second one was we will name the second satellite after whatever you want, and that was where the first commitment came from. Once you have a first commitment, then it's easier to put around together. So they agreed, and we shook hands there, and so that was where the first money came from. They chose to name it Shakuntala because it was these two brothers who put in the money, and Shakuntala is their mother's name, so it was a gift for their mother.
In terms of the launch vehicle, is it cheaper from ISRO or from a foreign space agency?
It used to be the cheapest with ISRO up until probably 2022, and then SpaceX came up with this rideshare program where they only take small satellites, and now SpaceX is the cheapest. SpaceX numbers are public, so I can speak about them. It's about $6,000 per kilogram. ISRO is fairly close to that, but not as cheap, I would say. So they are still on the lower end of all the rockets, but SpaceX is the cheapest, then ISRO, and then everyone.
And the average weight of a satellite is?
We launch, right now we have two classes of satellites, a 50 kilogram satellite and a 200 kilogram satellite, but we plan on increasing. But for us, it's about 50 and 200.
So why can't you launch them just one by one continuously?
We can. Right now, the 6 satellites we're building, 3 of them will launch with SpaceX, 3 of them will launch with ISRO, right? The choice for that was kind of not in our hands because there aren't as many rockets going to the orbits we want. So we have to choose the ones that are, as soon as our satellites are ready, the closest launch, because we don't want to keep them waiting too much. And second, the ones that work within our cost boundaries, which basically leaves only SpaceX and ISRO.
Sir, who are the customers of the hyperspectral images of the Earth, basically your clients, and how is the market growing in this sector?
So the Earth observation market is kind of new. It started only in the 1990s when the first private company in US came about called Digital Globe, and then has grown from there. The Earth observation, as in the satellite imagery and the analysis market, is I think probably about $14 to $15 billion globally, and that's growing at roughly about a 10 to 15% CAGR depending on which report you look at globally, and will continue to grow. The use cases are a lot more interesting. So on one side you have agriculture. It's probably the biggest sector that we have in terms of our customers today. These include seed companies. So every company that is building seeds of different kinds want to know how their crops are performing in different geographies of the world. Then you have the commodity traders. They want to know that if they are going to take a price position for coffee or cocoa in some place, what is the yield going to be for that in any part of the world. You have fertilizer companies. They want to know if a soil is missing a particular nutrient somewhere, because if it is missing, let's say, nitrogen, and we can identify that, they can go to the farmer and be like, nitrogen is missing, here's our nitrogen fertilizers. And most importantly, it is the ones where we are getting to the direct farmers. In some cases, these are cooperatives like Land of Lakes and others, where we interface with one entity, they end up giving the input to farmers. Or the Ministry of Agriculture in India, we interface with them. Now it is their responsibility to disseminate the way they see fit. So I think that's on agriculture. Everything from soil health to crop health to pest infestation to identifying how seeds are doing. Then you have oil and gas companies. Regulatorily, it is becoming a big issue everywhere that if a leak is happening, either an underground oil leak or an above ground gas leak, it needs to be plugged in as soon as possible so it doesn't end up harming the planet, but also people around. Oil and gas companies are big users. Mining companies, helping reduce the footprint of the mining companies. Why do they need to be going everywhere and mining in areas that there might not be minerals in? We can just tell them, here is where the minerals are. Don't bother with the rest of the area because you'll not find anything there, and therefore reduce the impact. As well as when mining is happening, they end up creating a lot of these polluted materials called tailings dams, and monitoring them to make sure it doesn't leak into the biomes around them is important. And finally, government ministries, everyone from forestry. People want to know how forests are growing or shrinking. They want to keep a track on what's happening at their borders. If someone, amassing something there, or is someone doing illegal chemical testing, biological testing, nuclear testing, and so on.
So how deep do these spectral
They don't
hyperspectral cameras
penetrate the earth. Everything that we see is on the surface of the
like you
earth.
said, mining, you said they will identify which area is good for mining.
Correct.
So don't they have to look deeper into the earth?
No. So most minerals, you have either some part of the ore that is jutting out from the earth, so you can see those. You can't tell how much of it is underneath. Obviously, for that you need to drill. But what we're telling is, in this area we found zero traces of anything. In this area we found traces of these ores. In some cases, you will not find any traces of the exact mineral on the surface, but you find indicator minerals. If you're looking at gold, there is a particular indicator material that generally is found around that. It's not 100%, but 90% every time you find it there, you'll find something there. So that's how we work. We don't penetrate the earth.
Always, now that the government has opened up the space sector for the private sector, how do you see India as a marketplace for Pixxel? Especially when the ISRO chairman himself has been saying that there is not much demand yet for satellite launch market in India yet.
Correct. Yeah, there isn't today. The hope is that it will change. Very rudimentarily, the way to look at the trend is, let's look at the US, let's look at China, and let's look at India then. So US, China, India, that is the spending power in terms of what is given to a space agency, and also defense. Defense ends up being a big buyer of space products. US has been a leader in it for quite a few decades. China has really come across in the last 2 decades to do that. India is obviously trying to catch up to that, right? So in 20 years, China went from having zero market to being the second largest domestic market for everything space, whether that's launch vehicles, whether that's launching satellites, communications, or imaging, right? So I would say we just need to look at that trend to say that India will also grow. Now that the space has been privatized, but because before that it wasn't. And the number of companies that started and are doing well today only started in 2017. And for a space company to do anything decent or worthwhile, they have to be there for at least 10 to 20 years in most cases, right? SpaceX is now more than 20 years old. So it will still take time. I think we are still 5 years away from actually seeing real successes in space, and 20 years away from there being a self-sustaining ecosystem within the country. But that will have to grow, and that will grow if the government is the catalyst for it faster. Otherwise, it will still grow if the private industry sort of need to interact. But the one thing I keep saying is, look, there's local opportunities in every country that you need to build certain rockets for a certain country's launches because of security reasons. You need to build certain satellites in the country for security reasons. But the real market is when you're catering to the globe. Space is a global market by design. You can't limit yourself to one country except in a few cases. You have to look at if your offering will be worthwhile everywhere. But you're right, it's very early, but hopefully given the trends we have seen everywhere and the opening that has happened in 10 years, it should have changed.
Awais, you spoke about fireflies and honeybees. So what kind of satellites are these? Are the fireflies hyperspectral, and what are the honeybees? And you also signed a contract recently with Indian Air Force. What is it all about, if you can share about?
Sure. So I think Fireflies and honeybees are both hyperspectral satellites, just that the range of the wavelength we cover changes. With the fireflies, we are looking at what you call visible and near infrared. So you are looking at infrared, but it's not the major chunk of infrared. You are looking at a decent portion of it at the beginning of it. The rest of it is visible. So it still shows you many more new things. But then for some things to be expanded, you need to go to what you call short wave infrared. So we extend the wavelength range, and that means that the satellites get bigger, the cameras get bigger. So fireflies are hyperspectral 5 meter, but the wavelength range is limited to start with. Whereas with honeybees, it's 5 meters, it's commercial satellites, but the wavelength range is much more expanded. A combination of these two will cover 99% of use cases between them. That's the difference between these two. The contract with IDEX, in the case of fireflies and honeybees, we build satellites for ourselves. The ownership never changes. We build them, we launch them, we operate them. So the entire spending is by us. What we do is we sell data, we sell the services that come out of these satellites. In the case of the Indian Air Force for IDEX, we are not concerned with what the operations are. The operations will be mainly for looking at borders, looking at illegal testing, illegal growth and things like that. But we are not going to be operating the satellite. Our job is to build a satellite that is to a certain specification, because we already have the experience of building our own satellites and the infrastructure. Build it, provide it, hand it over. That is one of the publicly announced contracts we do have, but most of our work happens with civil and other commercial entities. So while we sell data on one side, we will also sell satellites, and this Indian Air Force contract is a similar one where we build and provide a satellite.
Do you have any timelines for the Indian Air Force satellites going up?
Yeah, I would say probably within 18 months, we should have that satellite up in space before the end of 2025. But likely we're aiming at mid-2025.
So how does one access your images? Can the average curious person come to your center?
You can. Not today, because we are very selectively working directly with customers. But I would say come October or November of this year, yes, anyone will be able to create an account online on our website, pixxel.space/Aurora, and you will get access to a platform. It's basically Google Earth, but much more advanced. Like if you've all played with Google Earth, you go to a map, you start zooming in. That is a normal RGB image, a color image. What you will see in our case is you will see a lot more. Obviously, in some areas, you'll have to pay for the data if it's not already there. For example, I can log in there, I can type Aldur, Chikmagalur, it will take me there. I would not have likely imaged that area because no one's asked before, but I can place a tasking order. Like, I want to order an image for this in the next week or next 2 weeks, and then it will go to our satellites and they will image and they'll deliver it, as long as you can pay for it. It will be fairly nominal. And in most of the areas, we will have already collected images. For example, if you're looking at the Amazon rainforest, it's a hotspot of area and we want to be keeping a track of deforestation happening, forest biodiversity. Anyone should be able to come in, log in, just either type the Amazon or scroll to the globe, go there. And then not only that, but also use any of our tools there to analyze. Like one of the tools, for example, would be show me the forest biodiversity and how it has changed. So if you click on that model, it will generate a model where you can change between dates and see how the biodiversity has changed. Different levels get opened up at different access levels and subscription levels. But at the basic level, anyone should be able to come in, search, either look at an existing data, pay for it and download it, or create an order for a new one.
So I'm assuming these are geostationary satellites?
No.
They are moving around?
They're moving around. They are what you call sun-synchronous satellites.
Okay, because...
They are synchronized with the sun. That is why we need 6 satellites to start with for a daily revisit and 18 for more coverage and daily revisit. But they're continuously moving around. But when they come over a certain area, they always come over it at the same time.
Okay, and so in one orbit, around when it comes back to the same time, on an average, how many pictures would it have taken?
So here's how it works. Let's say the satellite has just exited from the South Pole and it is coming towards the North Pole. I can switch on the camera at the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and I can continuously image it all the way till Suez Canal, stop it, and then that is one image for us. Now we can break it down into as many as we want, but there is no limit in terms of the length of the image that we can take. So we basically take these strips. We are painting the Earth in every go. Then in the platform, we split it into an image of, I would say, 10 cross 10 kilometers each. So there is like, if you want to really break it down, you look at maybe 6,000 kilometers length divided by like 10, that many images.
6,000 kilometers in length, and width would be how much?
40 kilometers for one go. But again, since we are painting the Earth, if one satellite has done 40 here, The other would have done 40 adjacent to it. The other one would have done
It's like a
40
harvester.
adjacent to it. Correct. Exactly. So we can create a mosaic of any place on Earth, no matter how big it is. But in each go, it is limited to a 40-kilometer wide swath and a length of a few thousand kilometers.
So from each image, you can get different kinds of analysis. Like with the same image, you can get the mining data, you can get the agriculture data, you can get defense data or whatever else.
Correct. Out of the 300 wavelengths, if the same image has a mine, 50 or 60 of those will tell me about the minerals. Some 20 or 30 others will tell me about the greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, some other 50 will tell me about vegetation indices. So image doesn't change, the bands doesn't change. The information is captured in different bands for different use cases.
Just to take it forward, in fact, I wanted to ask you more about, some of the fiction that we have read and heard. But do you see there'll be a time when actually a man can go to moon? Will there be colonies on Mars? I mean, do you think about things like that?
Yeah, I think, look, colonies probably is a strong word given previous historical connotations, likely settlements, yes, for sure. If you look at the history of humanity, we've always expanded to places, no matter how remote, Antarctica, Arctic. The Inuits have been living near the Arctic for ages, right? And we went to the moon the last time and we came back, but I think the next time you're going, it's for good in terms of settlements. To start with, it'll obviously be very specialized astronauts. It has to be specialized people, scientists and other folks that are going there to do studies. But likely, maybe, and I'm being maybe optimistic here, 30 years or so, we should have settlements and the capacity from a launch standpoint that a private citizen can pay and get there as long as you have the money. Elon Musk obviously talks about having a ticket to Mars at $250,000, not out of pocket for some people in developed countries, for example. Yes, it'll happen. I think that's the natural trend of, it's not a question of if humanity will expand and settle in space, it's a question of when. The when is tough to answer. It'll be a collaborative effort between countries and the budget that is being allotted to that and so on, but it'll happen for sure. I hope to see it happen before.
If we are settling in space, you still need raw materials. You can't carry it from Earth. Would you get it from asteroids maybe?
Yeah. So I think the long-term vision for Pixxel, it started with wanting to do asteroid mining. And asteroid mining. Right. So the plan of action, very rudimentary at that point for me, was step 1, build hyperspectral cameras that look at the Earth. That is what we're doing today. Step 2, the same hyperspectral cameras can be turned outwards, send these spacecrafts to the moon, Mars, the asteroid belt, and build a map of the solar system. So if you go between Mars and Jupiter in the asteroid belt, we can identify which of these asteroids are stony and are useless, which of them have certain precious materials. And by precious, I mean useful in space, not palladium or platinum or something else. Or can you have fuel from them? Like water, for example, can be used as fuel if you separate it to hydrogen and oxygen, and a lot of these asteroids have ice in them, and you can sort of melt that and store water. So when humanity expands towards space and starts settling and building biomes in orbit, like more space stations in cislunar orbit and others, it does not make sense to mine all of that material and mineral from Earth, because why do you want to be polluting the planet more when there's so much more material actually available in space?
So let's pollute space.
It's not polluting, right? You're taking a barren part of a rock and then extracting material from there and keeping Earth as like a protected national park. So all heavy industry can then move off Earth. You can build industries there for things that are polluting. Again, very long-term vision, and to do that, you need to know what is in what asteroid, and hopefully, if we know first which one is useful, then we can go and mine it first. So that's where the material will come from. So SpaceX, the way I think about it is SpaceX is building the railroads for the space revolution, as in the transportation layer. They will help transport stuff from here and there. The likes of Blue Origin and others are building the buildings, the habitats in space. We want to be the ones to provide the material to sort of make it all happen, but very long-term vision.
What is your assessment of the space sector in India? And where do you see Pixxel? I mean, is it going to be having more stake in India or abroad? And what is it that you would like to see change in India? And if I may ask, what is in your wish list?
Sure. So I think where India is very early, very, very early, I would say privately. I mean, of course, ISRO has done tremendously well. When I talk about very early, I don't mean as a country we are early. We are one of the very few countries to have done stuff on Moon, Mars and all of that. But keeping the civil and the government funded part aside, the private sector is very, very early. You have now a couple of serious rocket companies in Skyroot and Agnikul attempting to do rocket launches, but both of them are right now suborbital. Skyroot did a 80-kilometer suborbital launch. Agnikul did, I think, an 8 or 10-kilometer suborbital controlled ascent and descent, which are great starts, but there's still some way to go to put stuff in orbit. I don't have a doubt that they will do that, but it will take a year or two or more. Even with us, right, all we have done is we've launched 3 satellites, but those are more pathfinders than fully commercial satellites. The fully commercial satellites will launch later this year, and then hopefully they will be fully commercial and we can launch more and so on. And everyone else that is trying to do it are at the early stages as well. So the ecosystem has a long way to go, that the companies are, while cool, can sustain themselves on their own, because in the end a business is a business. You have to make more money than you're spending at some point in time for you to sustain. So some way to go there, but do we have the talent to do that? Absolutely. Like probably the third best country in the world in terms of the space talent you would find, in terms of the number, in terms of sheer number, you probably would have US and China in terms of the people working on it. And with what ISRO has done, and ISTs and IITs and others, we have the talent to be able to do that. We have the budget in terms of the growing GDP and economy to be able to do that as well, because we don't see the funding stopping there in terms of space or defense anytime soon. But as I said, I think the real test of whether we have succeeded will only be in 5 to 10 years, when the companies that are doing now have gotten there. And not only building in India for India, but building in India for the world. And to answer your second question there, basically, I think we probably would be 50-50 in terms of we will continue to build the ecosystem for data here. It's very nascent. The satellite contract that the Indian Air Force gave is the first of its kind. We hope that there will be many hundreds for many companies coming in the future. But the market already exists in the US, in Europe, and we don't want to let that go, right? So it will be a combination of keep on making revenue from where we can get it today, while growing the ecosystem that will end up being a major part of it in the future. And the third on the wish list, I think the current space policy and the guidelines are fairly liberal for a start, right? In terms of what has come as a first draft, given that there are comments from all ministries trying to, make sure that their interests are spoken of, the policy that has come out is fairly liberal. For example, I would never have thought seeing a clause that if a private company can go and lay stake to an asteroid, they can keep the stake to it, right? Only the US and Luxembourg had previously done that, and you have that in the Indian policy. Very forward-looking. And they try to keep away from anything that was saying you can't do this or you can't do that, and limited to saying you can only do this. So that clarity was good, but obviously there are some wish lists. For example, since we still have to import a lot of stuff, import duties end up being a big factor, because the cost advantage goes away if you are paying approximately an average of 30% import duties across all things we are importing. So having some sort of an import holiday for space related stuff, we want to grow it. Having some sort of obviously a tax holiday for new companies here. But the biggest one is the government needs to become a big buyer and start trusting the business a bit more. There's always been a, we are the government and you are a private kind of a thing. That's changing obviously over the last 2, 3, 4 decades, but still some way to go there, where we still don't have a fully funded government program for any space program. And that's a big difference from China or US, where you have so many fully funded government programs. The company doesn't have to worry, where do we get the money from? Where do we get the bank guarantee from? Because the government is saying, look, it's okay if you fail, but we're going to fund 5 similar companies, and maybe even if 2 succeed, the rest, is fine to lose. That I think needs to sort of move a little bit forward. So, but not to complain, things are much better than they were 4 years ago when we had zero policy. And the one that we have is quite liberal, and we can do stuff. But if we really want to, leapfrog, like Vikram Sarabhai used to say, not just catch up, but leapfrog other countries, these would be good wish lists to have.
The new government is in place, and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will be presenting budget later this month. So what are your expectations from this year's union budget?
I would say more money for space-related acquisitions, tax holidays, import holidays. PLI scheme for space, I think given so much manufacturing has been happening and the idea is for it to be manufactured here, PLI, even if not, money at the beginning, maybe money gotten back as an incentive after we have done something. Similar to the semiconductor program, having some sort of a dedicated funding for space-related stuff would be helpful, especially for indigenizing a lot of things, because we are dependent, as I said, on quite a few things for supply chain from outside. So I would say first and foremost, having more budget to actually directly procure space-related services, data, satellites, rockets, for Department of Space or InSpace or NCL, whoever they want to use it from. Whereas on the other side, I think just any of these financial incentives, like they have looked at already for electronics or semiconductors. It's not new, it just needs to be extended to space a little bit.
You want a quantum jump and all this?
Yes, it would be good to have a space jump, yeah.
Just curious, how big is your team?
So we are 200 people right now, 200 full-time employees. Of course, with consultants and interns, I think 225, but full-time employees is about 200 globally. In India, we are about 170 or 175.
Okay, Awais, you're 26. I am 62. Reverse number. We are, however, bound by our common interest in science fiction, especially the Foundation series in Isaac Asimov. So, a hypothetical question for you: do you think there is intelligent life out there in space?
Yeah, like Fermi paradox is of immense fascination to me, right? Not just the fact that we should be seeing some signs of intelligent life in the universe, but we can't see it, but more about the different solutions that are proposed for that, as to why it might not be the case. The probability probably leads towards there being other intelligent life. I mean, the universe is just so mind-bogglingly big, and the time scales that we talk about in terms of humanity, we have just been here for like a blink of an eye. Either we haven't been together at the same time with someone else, or we just aren't in the same part of the universe, or even in sort of the same galaxy. The chances are for intelligent life that likely there is, but there's no way to confirm. But I would wager there probably being others.
The chances are high, right? Because after all, Earth was formed by a combination of chemical reaction. So the same reaction could have occurred anywhere.
Yeah. So the usual thing that is shown is one of the solutions of Fermi paradox is that the chemical reactions that happen for life on Earth are quite difficult and rare to happen, which even might be fair. But it is not necessary that the same chemical reactions need to happen for life somewhere else. Like, fine, we are made up of, we are carbon organisms with DNA and sort of everything else. But it might be something else where consciousness might have arisen out of some other chemical reactions. So yes, the chances that the same chemical reaction would have happened somewhere are not zero. But on the other hand, some chemical reaction has happened that could still lead to the advent of consciousness in something could have also happened. Like if we can make silicon think now in terms of artificial intelligence, why not some other chemical reaction somewhere else as well?
How are you able to gauge the market for hyperspectral imaging?
The idea was we gauged market for satellite data, and then we said, okay, we have to replace existing data with a much more superior data set. So there existed an existing market for satellite data. So when we talked to customers, these were customers that were buying satellite data from other sources, just that the data was not hyperspectral, so they could only see limited things. Like one customer we talked to, they were using satellite data for identifying crop health, but they were also using weather station data for moisture. They were also looking at a soil IoT company for soil health. All three of that can just be done with hyperspectral data. No? So why would they spend on three things when they can replace that with one capture of hyperspectral? So the market existed, one, for satellite imagery. We are going after the same market and we are replacing it with a superior product, one. Second, the new markets beyond this was just a bottoms-up calculation that there are likely these many companies across the globe according to our estimates. They will likely have these areas depending on the geography. And so we computed how much of data could be procured and built out a projection from that for new things. But for an existing market, it already existed. It wasn't like we were starting from zero.
So like last year, there was this huge thing of this land subsidence in Joshimath. Then about 10-15 days ago, there was this stories about land subsidence in Srinagar.
Correct.
Would your know-how be able to help situations like this?
It would be one of the data sets used. It won't be the silver bullet. For example, you would still need a lot of seismographic data that we can't penetrate the earth. So you would still need those sensors and seismographic data. But beyond that, from a surface level, if soil is shifting around and, what has the chemical composition been? Are we seeing a lot more water in certain area and that could lead to certain things? Yes, that could be one of the data sets used, but it won't be the only one.
Awais, this is a light question, I'm sure you're 24/7 into this, but do you ever get like exhausted and say, enough and I want to unwind? So what does Awais do?
He's 26. Why does he need to unwind? Wind up more.
The question was for him. So you do something totally stark opposite or, different.
Stark opposite. I like trekking wherever I go. Thankfully, work takes me to some nice places, and whenever I'm there and if the weekend happens to fall in between, just go on a nice trek. For example, a few months ago, we were in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro for a few meetings and ended up hiking one of the mountains, so quite beautiful. The other thing is not diametrically opposite, but I like to read. Reading helps unwind actually. Like Mondays to Saturdays usually are full of work, but Sundays are like just sit and pick up a book and read.
Fiction or non-fiction?
Both.
Both?
Both.
You went to school in your village or did you go to a district headquarters?
Up till 7th I was in Aldur. Up till 8th to 10th it was a little further away from Aldur, so not Chikmagalur, but still like rural, but it was a good good school, residential. 11th and 12th was in Mangalore.
I'm in Mangalore.
Great.
Thank you so much. This is like a completely out of the world experience, so to speak. Thank you once again.
Thank you folks, appreciate it.